There is a striking disconnect between what aliens from outer space are popularly believed to look like and what is actually reported. The popular idea, known as the Greys, are often short and always skinny, with gray skin, big heads, huge bug-like black eyes, and just a slit of a mouth. Creatures like these appear in movies and on book and magazine covers worldwide as the generally accepted appearance of real aliens from outer space. More generally speaking though, actual reports of alien encounters have displayed a real variety of weird creatures. Some are amazing, some are scary, and some are just plain odd. Harrison Bailey loved to walk so much that he found a way to profit from it. He had a huge green tire with advertising space on the side of it, and he'd take long walks rolling it with sponsored ads. He was on such a walk from Chicago, Illinois, to Joliet, on September 24, 1951, when he rolled his big tire into a small wooded area along the route near the town of Orland Park. As he approached the woods, he became aware of a strange prickling in his neck, and saw a sort of silver whirlwind in the sky behind him. But he was on a tight schedule with a long walk ahead, so he ignored it and continued forward into the woods. In front of him was what he took to be a large frog on a log. As he approached it, he became aware of other animals about the same size hidden in the foliage on both sides of the road. Small round insects were all over the road. Bailey walked on, figuring his boots would protect him. Then the frog on the log stood up and started walking towards him. Soon Bailey was surrounded by these bipedal frogs, and they were jumping up to touch him on the shoulders, back, hips, and legs, and when they touched him, it felt unpleasant. He started to run, still rolling his wheel ahead of him and over the strange insects that covered the ground, eventually escaping the horde of frogs. Further along the road, Bailey ran across a large, rounded object that opened to reveal two 5-foot-tall human-like beings wearing helmets that obscured their faces. The next thing Bailey was aware of was lying on a bed of some sort, presumably inside the object, with the two beings examining him and, somehow, communicating to instruct him to tell the world about them. They never actually spoke. After this strange exam, Bailey was allowed to leave with his wheel, but despite the beings asking him to tell the world about them, he immediately forgot about nearly everything that happened that day. It was only around 25 years later, when hypnotic regression was used to try and recover what happened in the hours of that September day, that the strange series of events was first told to the world. On Sunday, November 1, 1954, Rosa Daynethley was walking along a footpath through fields and thickets on her way from her house to the nearby town of Senina, Italy, where she planned to place a handful of carnations at the altar of the Madonna Pellegrina, the Pilgrim Madonna. It was a path she used almost daily, and an area very familiar to her, until she entered a small clearing and found some sort of vehicle in the middle of it. The object was only about 7 feet tall, and looked like two tall cones connected together at their large ends, like a round diamond shape. It stood on 3 small legs, and had an opening in the side that revealed 2 small chairs. As Rosa was just starting to wonder about this object, 2 tiny men, only 3 feet tall or so each, walked around from the opposite side of it to approach her in a friendly fashion. The 2 looked mostly human, but their size and an odd curve in the center of their lips showed they were not. Both wore one-piece gray overalls that covered them from their necks to their feet, and each wore a short cape. They also had odd helmets that covered their ears. The 2 short men tried to talk to Daynethley, but she didn't understand the language they were using. They snatched some carnations from her and dropped them inside the craft. Then one of them reached inside and brought out 2 white spheres, and Daynethley took the opportunity to run from the scene. When she looked back over her shoulder at them, they had vanished. It was a long night on the farm in Kelly, Kentucky. It all started when Billy Ray Taylor saw a strange object fly across the sky with a rainbow trail, and then drop into a deep gully nearby. Taylor headed to the farmhouse of the Sutton family. They were friends, to tell everyone there what he had seen, but the family thought he'd probably seen a falling star and was just exaggerating the details. Half an hour later, something glowing approached the house from the fields. Taylor and Lucky Sutton watched the strange glow from the back door of the house until it became clear it was some sort of bipedal creature, 3.5 feet tall, with a huge round head and very long arms ending in talons, and was walking towards them. The odd creature appeared to be made of silver, and it held its arms high above its head as it approached, as if in surrender. And there didn't seem to be any obvious reason it was glowing. Taylor and Sutton both grabbed guns, and when the creature came within 20 feet of the house they opened fire, with the odd result that the creature flipped backwards and then ran away. Soon, another such creature was found staring into the house at one of the windows. They shot at it from inside the house and the weird thing flipped backwards and out of sight. Assuming the body would be just outside, Taylor and Sutton headed for the front door. As Taylor walked out, however, One of the creatures was seen to reach down from above and touched his hair with its talons. The family yanked Taylor back inside before he could go further, and Sutton ran out and shot the creature, knocking it off the roof. Another creature was spotted in a tree nearby, and Taylor joined Sutton as both shot at the creature. It fell from the tree and floated lightly down to the ground before running off. Then another ran from around the house at the two men. Sutton fired point blank into the creature, and they heard the bullets hit it, but the strange creature was unharmed even though it turned and ran after being shot. It was now obvious to both Taylor and Sutton that their guns were useless, and they retreated back into the house. But the strange visitors continued to pester the family until around 5 a.m. The creatures never did anything aggressive. Instead, they appeared to simply be curious about the family, always looking in at the windows but never entering the house. It was a Sunday around 2 p.m. in Casablanca, California, and a large group of boys were playing in a yard in front of one of their houses when they noticed the first strange object in the sky above them. Soon others appeared and disappeared with a musical ping, putting on a show the boys thought was fun. But anytime they tried to get one of the adults in the house to look, everything vanished. So it was just for them to see, and they soon accepted this. One of the objects, multicolored and bright, landed about half a block away in a field. Then two of the older boys saw a strange thing in front of the house next door. It was about 3.5 feet tall, floating above the ground, and transparent enough that they could see the brickwork of the house through the thing's body. It wore a belt with a round disc that glimmered like a mirror. The creature appeared to have eyes and a mouth, but across the area a nose would be. There were 4 round objects that shined like diamonds. Another boy saw just an arm hanging alone in midair, beckoning him to come closer. Then another full being emerged from the landed craft, also floating above the ground but much more solid looking than the previous. This one appeared to be wearing a satin-like material, and it had 4 legs and 4 hands, each of its arms splitting in 2 at the elbow. This being somehow talked to one of the boys, telling him to climb a nearby tree so he could be picked up in 15 minutes. Using a hose, the older kids kept the younger ones out of the tree, and 15 minutes later one of the strange objects flew around the top of the tree before all of the objects disappeared for the last time. Jose Antonio da Silva, from Bebedouro, Brazil, just wanted to fish. He got up early that morning to do just that, after having hiked to the lake and set up camp the day before. But around 3 p.m. his plans were changed against his will when a group of 4-foot-tall humanoids, completely covered head to toe in strange suits, paralyzed his legs and then dragged him aboard a weird craft. For hours Da Silva sat with his captors as the strange vehicle moved. There were no windows, so he could only feel the motion of the craft, with no idea where it was going. They had placed a helmet over his head, just like the ones they were wearing themselves. When they reached their destination, he was brought into a large room and placed sitting on a stool. Here he saw these beings without their helmets on. He continued to wear his. Among them was one being who was slightly taller and appeared to be in charge. They all looked about the same, roughly human, with red hair that hung to their waists and beards that stretched to their stomachs. Their eyebrows were very thick, about 2 finger widths, and they had no eyelashes on their slightly larger than human green eyes. The biggest difference was their mouths, which were a little wider than a human's, and had no teeth in them, looking more like a fish's mouth on the inside. They communicated to Da Silva by means of gestures and illustrations. He soon understood that they wanted him to go back to Earth to gather information for them, then eventually return to live with them for several years, finally to return to Earth with them as their ambassador and guide. Da Silva refused the offer. With that, he was taken back to the strange craft and, after some time, was dropped off in the middle of the night by a stream. Once he found his way to a road, he was able to learn that he was about 30 km/18.6 miles away from where he had been fishing. And 4.5 days had passed. It was 10:30 p.m. and a foggy night out in Frederick, Wisconsin, and farmer William Bosick was driving home from a co-op meeting he had attended in the nearby town of Frederick, when his headlights reflected off something on the left side of the road. Bosick had already been driving at a slower pace due to the fog, and he slowed down more as he approached the object. And I do mean object, for it was no car on the side of the road. The object was about 8 to 10 feet tall, and was sitting still. On the side facing Bosick as he drove up there was a curved glass panel that he could see through, and inside there was a human-like being. The being appeared to wearing a tan shirt of some type, but Bosick could also see that it had short hair or fur on its upper body and arms. The arms were raised above the being's head. There was more short hair sticking out from the sides of the being's head, though its face and chin were hairless. High up on its head, 2 calf-like ears stuck out about 3 inches to each side. It also had large, protruding eyes. Bosik couldn't see more of the craft or figure because of the fog, but he'd seen enough. He stepped on the gas pedal and rocketed home. It was nearly a month before Bosik plucked up the courage to tell anyone else what happened. On further thought, it occurred to Bosik that the strange being looked just as frightened of him as he had been of it, and he kinda wished he could go back and be friendlier. 19-year-old Lee Parrish had just driven home from his girlfriend's house in Prospect, Kentucky. Along the way, he had seen a bright rectangular object in the sky. When he got home, his eyes hurt terribly, and he discovered the 7-minute drive had taken nearly 45 minutes to complete for some reason. Worried, his mother convinced him to have hypnotic regression in an attempt to remember what happened during the missing time, and the answers he gave were just strange. Parrish's car had been lifted off the ground by the bright object, and then Parrish himself had somehow been instantly brought to a room that looked too large to be inside the craft. In this room were 3 strange objects. On his left was a large black slab shaped like a tombstone with an additional bump on top that nearly reached the ceiling. On his right was a red block that was just a little shorter than Parrish, and in front of him was a more complicated-looking white block. The white block was Parrish's height, about 6 feet, and had a surface that curved away from Parrish on the front, with a distinct rectangular head. Parrish didn't know how he knew, but he sensed these objects were sentient beings, and that the white one was in charge. The black slab had a single limb that stuck out from one side of its front. It started to use this to slowly touch Parrish on his side and back, a feeling that was unpleasant, cold and burning at the same time. It made Parrish feel like he was vibrating. Next, the red block touched him. It too had a single limb coming from its body, and Parrish sensed it was a bit frightened of him. It slowly touched his shoulder, and then the side of his head, above the ear in the hairline. These touches came with a sensation of being pricked with a needle, but didn't hurt very long. After touching him, the red block moved to the white one, and either disappeared behind it, or merged with it. The black slab backed away slowly as the white object made a sound like sandpaper being used. Then the white one moved to the black slab and, again, either disappeared behind it or merged with it. A moment later, the black slab disappeared, leaving Parrish in the room alone. Then Parrish was in his car again, looking at a little pond near the roadway he had been driving on. His eyes were completely bloodshot, and he had trouble sleeping for days afterwards simply because of how badly they hurt. Private security guard Piero Fortunato Zanfretta was driving his rounds in Torriglia, Italy that icy cold night when, just a bit after midnight, his car's engine, lights, and radio all failed at once, bringing the car to a stop in front of one of his client's houses. While this bothered him, Zanfretta quickly noticed 4 strange lights moving around the client's house. Assuming these were burglars, he grabbed his gun and flashlight, walked through the open gate, and snuck quietly along the wall to surprise them. Then someone touched his back. Spinning around with his gun and light in front of him, Zanfretta found himself facing a 10-foot-tall being with undulating, hairy, green skin. He pointed his flashlight up to see the face, and dropped it in shock. The creature had triangular yellow eyes, and red veins on its forehead. Zanfretta quickly grabbed up the flashlight and ran for his car, but he was soon aware that something very bright was behind him. He turned to look and discovered a huge triangular craft, glowing brightly enough that he had to shield his eyes, was rising from the backyard of the house with a hissing noise. He ran to his car and made a desperate call out on his radio, which cut off before he could give his location. An hour later, 2 other patrol cars came through the area and discovered Zanfretta lying on the ground out in front of the now closed gate to the house. As they approached, he jumped up, pointing his gun at them. His eyes were bulging, and he didn't seem to recognize them. They managed to overpower him, but noticed as they did so that Zanfretta and his clothes were very warm despite the icy temperatures he had presumably been lying in till just a moment before. Further investigation after daybreak showed 2 huge horseshoe-shaped impressions in the ground behind the house, as if something massive had been sitting there. And 52 witnesses from around the city had all seen the bright light in the area at the same time that Zanfretta claimed to have been attacked. Federico Ibanez, 54, was driving to his vineyards just outside of Tours, Spain around 11:30 a.m. that morning, when he came across a strange object in the road ahead of him. It was shaped like half an egg, a large dome on 4 short legs, and appeared to be made from a shining white metal. It was about 8 feet/2.5 meters tall. As Ibanez puzzled over this object, 2 small figures emerged from near a carob tree about 36 feet/11 meters away, and headed for the craft. He saw the strange beings from the side, one behind the other. They were only about 3 feet/1 meter tall each, and appeared to be wearing white outfits that covered them from head to toe and looked as if they were inflated. The little beings almost appeared to be wearing tiny tents. The feet and hands were small and dark in color. All that Ibanez could make of their faces was that they had tubes of some sort that projected out from the face by about 3 inches/8 centimeters, like built-in binoculars. The two figures rushed to the vehicle and entered it, after which the half-egg rose quickly and silently, creating a whirlwind as it took off. Later researchers found 4 small impressions on the ground where Ibanez said the vehicle had been, and estimated a weight of about 4 tons from the depths of the impressions. It was around 6:30 p.m. at Voronezh Park in Voronezh, Russia. Children were playing, a group of adults were waiting at a nearby bus stop, and a large red oval, about 45 feet long by 18 feet high, was flying in circles about 40 feet above the ground. Which kind of caught everyone's attention. The oval craft landed lightly in the park, near several of the playing children, and 3 large beings came out, accompanied by a box-like robot. The beings were humanoid, but around 9 feet tall, with very long arms and a sort of dome instead of head and neck. These domes had 3 eyes, 2 whitish ones side by side, and then a red one above them, that was described as swiveling around like a radar. They appeared to be wearing silver jumpsuits with bronze boots, and set about collecting dirt samples. One of the 3 seemed to be in charge, and sometimes made sounds that were believed to be orders to the other 2. Everyone witnessing the event had been too stunned to really react at first, but it soon proved to be too much for one young man, who started to scream. And the being in charge clearly focused its attention on this young man, who was suddenly frozen in place. Everyone else then started to panic, as the strange beings now appeared to be a threat. But before a full panic set in, the beings and the craft simply vanished from view. 5 minutes later, the beings and the strange craft suddenly reappeared, in the same place they had been before, but one of the beings now held a short tube which had pointed at a teenager, who disappeared. Now a real panic broke out, as the 3 large beings returned to their craft, and the oval vehicle lifted up into the air. As it vanished from sight, the teenager suddenly reappeared from nowhere. Researchers were baffled by the strange events, but all witnesses stuck to their stories, and drawings by both the children and adults presented a consistent, though strange, portrait of the alien beings.